Now, the fictional world of Star Trek may not seem important to American politics, but I think it is, because both the direction that the left is taking this show and the direction the left wants to take America, they both follow the neo-Marxist philosophy called critical theory. Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. Cultural vandalism.
Mr. Reagan.
Let me begin by saying a lot of Star Trek fans seem to like this show, and I get why. Of all the new Star Trek shows that they've made recently, this is the one that most resembles traditional Star Trek, especially the original series.
Hit it.
And they do get a lot of things right. At first glance, this does seem quite a lot like original Star Trek, but upgraded with newfangled special effects, great cinematography, fantastic set design, and all that good flashy stuff. But I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Despite their best efforts at copying the original Star Trek show, they don't get it quite right. It's like a bad artist trying to create a forgery of a masterpiece. They'll produce something that looks vaguely like the original, but it's a pale imitation. It's a grotesque distortion, a twisted fake. And that's exactly how this Strange New Worlds show plays. And of course it does. Old TV shows promoted values like duty and honor. Kirk exemplified traditional masculinity, strength, and charisma.
So whatever's down there, McCoy's in the heart of it. Set up a landing party. Let's go get him.
Spock, as a character foil, exemplified intellectualism and stoicism.
For this to do what it does is impossible by any science I understand.
Duty, honor, masculinity, these are all things hated by the modern left. And that's why this new show was doomed to fail. It's an attempt to imitate a traditional Star Trek show by people who hate traditional Star Trek. Now, the fictional world of Star Trek may not seem important to American politics, but I think it is. I think that this, the wokeification of Star Trek, is a case of cultural vandalism, and it perfectly illustrates the cultural direction in which the radical left wants to push America. Because both the direction that the left is taking this show and the direction the left wants to take America, they both follow the neo-Marxist philosophy called critical theory. I'll explain what I mean by that in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. Over the years, you've probably tried different investments in stocks and mutual funds. You know they can be up and down all over the place. But with inflation running at 8.5%, its highest rate in 40 years, do you really need that kind of uncertainty? Being able to sleep at night knowing your investments aren't about to crash? Well, that is worth its weight in gold. And speaking of gold, if you've been jumping from one investment to the next, the gold IRA with Noble Gold is perfect. With gold, you shield your gains from taxes. You keep the real value of your wealth. You own a global asset, something tangible, and you protect your wealth against economic crashes. What is not to like? And this month, for every cash deal above $20K, you'll get an incredible 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin completely free as a thank you. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call 877-646-5347 right now to find out more, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Now, you've heard of critical race theory, and this is where that term comes from. Critical race theory is a subcategory of critical theory, which is far more sinister. Now, I believe that critical theory is actually the core reason that most TV shows and movies are being ruined today. We're all aware that Hollywood has become ridiculously woke in the past few years, and we all know that their projects have suffered because of it. People are less interested in stuff coming out of Hollywood, and woke producers aren't making the crazy profits that they used to. But although their power has diminished a little, Hollywood still has a strong influence on the culture. Children, teenagers, and weak-minded leftists are strongly influenced by the messages in films and on TV. And so I think it's extremely important to understand what messages are coming out of Hollywood. And although this new Star Trek show, Strange New Worlds, does seem a little bit less woke than the other two Star Wars shows on TV at the moment, it is not. It is just as bad. But in this new Star Trek show, there is a straight white male lead, and so it kind of looks like they've learned their lesson. But no, of course they haven't. What they've done here is called a bait and switch, and a lot of woke Hollywood producers are doing this at the moment. I'm actually considering making a whole video on this, but basically they use a popular straight white male character to introduce a female character, usually a woman of color, and then that new better character takes over the franchise.
You've got some pretty big boots to fill.
I'm aware.
And this is exactly what they're doing here with Strange New Worlds. The straight white male lead is barely in the show. It's almost all about the rest of the crew, in particular, the women. Mostly women of color. But okay, so what? So they don't like straight white men. Does that really make the show bad? How woke is the show really? Well, keep in mind that this show takes place in the future. And in the very first episode, they present a montage of the history of Earth falling into World War III. And to illustrate this, they use clips of the January 6th protest. Yeah, apparently that was the moment Earth slipped into devastating war.
Our conflict also started with a fight for freedoms. We called it the Second Civil War, then the Eugenics War, and finally, just World War III. This was our last day. The day the Earth we knew ceased to exist.
You know, it's funny to me that the left constantly points to conservatives and screams, fascist, while at the same time instituting authoritarian measures against us. And so I think that there is a reason for this cultural destruction, the cultural destruction of Star Wars, the cultural destruction of Star Trek. You see, I don't think that these people are just inferior artists producing a bad forgery. And, you know, they're not just sadists who want to destroy something that their sworn enemy straight white men love, although I'm sure that they very much enjoy that part of it. No, I think that it is all a result of critical theory. The writers of this show have been fully indoctrinated into this cult, and they are absolutely convinced by its hateful philosophy. And every story they write, every casting choice they make, and every message that they express throughout this show, it's all directed by critical theory. And this is why this Star Trek show is worth doing a video about. Because I believe that critical theory could utterly destroy American culture. Not only do I think that it could do this, I think that it is doing this. Now, I don't believe that the degradation of American culture began with critical theory. I would say that it started with the hippie movement. But in the 1960s and 70s, as drug abuse, a rejection of traditional values, and even hedonistic cults grew in popularity, regular American watched the devastating results of this cultural degradation, and there was a reaction against it. When I was a boy in the 1980s, I had dinner at the dinner table. I went to church. I played baseball in the street in front of my house with the neighbor kids. I had basically the same American cultural lifestyle as my parents did in the 1950s. Whenever there is a cultural push against traditional Christian values in America, there seems to be an even stronger push back. The problem with critical theory is that most people don't recognize it as a push against traditional Christian values. And so critical theory is becoming mainstream. And it's become so mainstream that I think it's actually destroying our culture. And this time, there isn't a strong push back. Critical theory holds that there is no truth, that the truth is whatever you want it to be. This is why leftists always say your truth instead of the truth. That's where this comes from. Now, not only does this destructive theory treat every traditional value with hostility and aims to stamp out all these values entirely, but it's a philosophy that discourages good and encourages evil. Because according to critical theory, there is no good and there is no evil. These are imaginary ideas constructed by selfish white men in order to control women and minorities and to confine wealth and power to just that white male demographic forever. That is not hyperbole. That is the actual belief of these cultists. White men thousands of years ago socially engineered culture to oppress women and minorities and to retain power for themselves. That is what they believe. It is as crazy as Scientology.
So postmodernism comes out of French philosophy. Michel Foucault is the most famous example of a French postmodernist. The central argument that was made by Foucault and postmodernists was that there is no natural essence to anything, that everything is a social construct. So postmodernists came along and said, guess what? You know what we found looking at history? We looked at history and we saw, first of all, that all these categories have changed over time, which tells us that they're just inventions. They're just inventions. They get reinvented all the time. And second of all, they have served the purposes of ruling elites because they get to put people in their boxes and control them more easily. Oh, those people over there, those are black, therefore they should be our slaves. So it's okay for us to have them as slaves. Those women over there, we don't want them, working for NASA, so we will have a rule against women working for NASA, whatever it is, right? So postmodernists said, none of this is biological, none of this is inevitable. You are now free to do what you want as an individual. It was a liberating moment. It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia. And I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics ever.
And so the theory promotes the idea that all the notions that we have about good and evil are just the ideas that these straight white men invented, and so you can reject them and embrace whatever concept of good and evil that you want, or do away with the concept entirely, as well as the concepts of math and biology and reality altogether. And if you've been thinking recently, wondering about how the folks over at Disney could go so crazy trying to inject LGBTQ messaging into children's cartoons, this is why. Critical theory. They've bought into it. They've joined the cult. They've drank the Kool-Aid. The whole concept of woke comes from critical theory. It's a kind of cultist term for when one is indoctrinated. You see, the left believes that when you become woke, that means that you have awakened to the truth. It's essentially the leftist equivalent to the right-wing term red-pilled. We believe that if you're red-pilled, well, you have awoken to the truth. Leftists believe that if you're woke, you have awoken to the truth. But while being red-pilled involves recognizing that men are men and women are women, being woke recognizes that men can totally be women and women can totally be men.
You are now free to do what you want as an individual. The trans movement, that started from postmodernism. That whole idea, right, is that, if you were born with a penis, you're a man and you should do X, Y, and Z with your life, right? The trans movement needed postmodernism to make that intervention and say, no, that's not true, right? You can actually be a woman because woman is an invention. It's a social construct.
And so we've got to ask ourselves, which is an awakening to reality and which is an awakening to delusion. One tactic of these woke critical theory cultists is to infiltrate powerful corporations like Disney, and at this they have succeeded. They first take over the HR department, and then comes the flood of new woke hires. Soon the company is controlled by the cult. And so it's incredibly important that every corporation identify anyone at a company in the cult of critical theory and fire them immediately. And every corporation must have measures in place to keep such cultists from ever being hired in the first place, because these cultists don't care about your company. They will pretend to care, sure, but their loyalty is to the cult. They're zealots, radicals, extremists.
It is the supreme achievement of academics ever.
The goals of the cult are all that matter to them. The goals of the company mean nothing to them. In some cases, tearing down your company is actually part of their plan. And this was certainly the case with Star Wars and Star Trek. Take something that's popular with straight white men and use it to promote radical feminism, anti-white racism, and LGBTQ messaging. And if the franchise dies because of it, well, that's a fine outcome for them as well. And so, although many see bad writing and a lack of respect for original material as the cause for the vandalism of these cultural masterpieces, at a more fundamental level, the problem is the cult of critical theory. But let's talk in detail about this new Star Trek show, because it really is an amazing insight into the mind of a critical theory cultist. In recent years, CBS has produced 3 new Star Trek shows: Star Trek Discovery, Picard, and now Strange New Worlds. These shows were all created by this man, Alex Kurtzman.
I love stories that are based around strong women, and we have some very strong women on that show. To have Sonequa and Michelle as captains of our ship is really, really exciting and different.
After watching at least part of all of them, I've come to the following conclusion about Kurtzman. First of all, Alex Kurtzman is very clearly a critical theory cultist. The doctrine of this cultist philosophy saturates each of these Star Trek shows. But I also noticed that Kurtzman is obsessed with black women. Kurtzman, I think, believes that he is the great white hope of black women. His first Star Trek show, Discovery, was all about a black woman. This black woman was written as always being right and being better than everyone at literally everything.
Discovery, let's go.
She's basically a superhero, but she suffers from self-doubt. And this, I think, is the message that Kurtzman is trying to send. If you're a woman, in particular a black woman, you're amazing. Now, he's not saying you can be amazing if you work hard and you accomplish great things. No, you are amazing. You were born amazing. You were born special. And to realize this amazingness, all you have to do is believe in yourself. In the episodes of Star Trek Discovery that I watched, this black woman, she knows she's amazing, but she doubts herself. And so she is then given some words of affirmation by another character and told that she just needs to trust her instincts because she's the bestest ever. And then she goes on to do whatever irrational or dangerous or insubordinate thing that she's convinced is best. And then it always turns out that that was the best thing. And she realizes that she is as amazing as she thought she was. And anyway, this seems to be a recurring thing in that show, Star Trek Discovery. But this new show, Strange New Worlds, has a character called Uhura. You may remember her from the original Star Trek series, but in this version, they've picked an actress that makes the character utterly unrecognizable. At least J.J. Abrams got that right with Zoe Saldana. Anyway, so Uhura looks like this now.
Cool.
And she's basically dealing with all the same stuff that I mentioned with the black woman from the Discovery series. She's super arrogant, speaks 37 languages or something like that.
I hear you speak 12 languages.
37.
Easy as that.
For me, sir, yes.
But she has all this self-doubt.
You all should be relying on someone who's prepared. Someone actually Starfleet, not someone who's going to get us all fried to a crisp.
But then somebody reassures her.
You are quite simply the only person for the job.
And then she turns out to be amazing.
We're definitely getting closer to resolving the whole genius or about to get us killed conundrum.
So the right time for genius.
The comet's force field just disappeared.
And if perchance there are any black female characters in any of these shows who don't have to face a bunch of self-doubt and discover that they're amazing, well, then they're just plain right about everything all the time. And they are literally better than everyone at everything. And they're probably a lesbian too.
Well, I want to, focus on me for a change. Maybe this isn't half bad to hang out with, so if that's your plan.
Now, in this show, Strange New Worlds, there are two straight white men on the show, Captain Pike and Spock. Now, the new Spock is terrible. He's a lame reimagining of the Leonard Nimoy Spock from the original series. Captain Pike is, on the other hand, a real masculine guy, an alpha male. He's from Montana, and he's got a beard at the beginning of the show. But he's a total phony. After watching a few episodes of this show, I've come to the conclusion that this is a caricature. It's a cartoon version of a masculine man. This is like what would happen if a gay guy who'd only heard straight men described to him had to write a straight guy into a story. Captain Pike is the alpha male that the effeminate beta male writes into a show, not knowing what actually makes an alpha male alpha. Needless to say, Captain Pike is sidelined for most of the show, and there doesn't seem to be another man in a leadership position anywhere else in the universe. Women are leaders of basically everything on these shows.
Talk to me.
It's classified.
Got deeper security clearance than you do.
Captain, Madam President.
This is our opportunity to end that conflict.
And today, we greet the President of United Earth.
Now, there is this belief on the left that women in power, unlike men, are always peaceful and good. Of course, the truth is that women can be just as vicious as men. I actually did a whole video on this a while back about the most vicious women in history. And let me tell you, researching that video was not fun. Some women from history were horrific. But the left thinks that women are basically just nicer and gentler and less likely to be violent or corrupt or evil, and so they think that women just always make better leaders than men. And in this new Star Trek show, just about every planet they go to, women are in charge. What's ridiculous about this is that the powerful women on these shows come across as super fake. I mean, there are plenty of impressive women in real life that little girls can look up to. If you just flip on Fox News, you can watch a ton of impressive female journalists like Maria Bartiromo, Harris Faulkner, or Dana Perino. And all these women have an authenticity to them. Why? Because they're genuinely impressive people. And so if you want to create a fictional version of this type of person, it shouldn't be that difficult. And yet every incarnation of a powerful woman by a leftist always comes across as phony. Every strong black woman that Kurtzman writes comes across as a weak, self-doubting teenager with PTSD, daddy issues, and imposter syndrome. It's almost like Kurtzman has never seen a woman who is actually strong, actually accomplished, and actually confident. And so it's clear to me that Kurtzman, like so many other hypocritical Democrats, is actually himself a sexist. I think deep down Kurtzman believes that women are inferior. And I think that deep down Kurtzman actually believes that black people are inferior. And because he feels guilty about believing those things, I think that he thinks it's his job to fix the problem. Now, equality used to be the goal for most Americans. But if deep down you believe that straight men are truly superior, well, then nobody else has a chance. And so that's why the left no longer strives for equality. They now strive for equity. Equity means that inferior people can succeed in equal number to superior people because the game is rigged for that outcome. And so that's what Kurtzman is doing. He's a racist, sexist bigot who believes that he is atoning for his sins by injecting strong female characters, LGBTQ characters, and ethnically diverse characters into his projects, and by making all the straight white male characters either evil or stupid or weak. He's allowing his own psychological problems to pervert a franchise that was beloved by millions. And it's this, his psychological problems, that brings me to my next point. Another thing that's a little bit odd about this show, as well as Discovery and Picard, is that Alex Kurtzman seems to be obsessed with psychotherapy. He puts all these long, emotionally charged and yet still painfully boring conversations between characters into each and every episode.
Even in space, growth. Sometimes remarkable growth is possible.
I understand. I've seen the heart of this in you. But other people's lives aren't up to you. And their deaths aren't your fault. Not mine if it comes. It's your mother's.
Some days I don't even know how to wake up. Love always ends in grief. He'd have done what you're doing right now. He'd have stopped me. I know. Why isn't he here to stop me?
And when I watch these shows, these conversations never resonate with me at all. I find myself just waiting for the stupid conversations to end because I don't really think he understands human psychology at all, but he thinks that he does. And look, most writers, we want to impart wisdom on the audience. And so that, I think, is what he's trying to do. And here's what I think is going on behind the scenes. I think that this guy has serious psychological problems of his own, and he probably sees a psychiatrist in order to try to treat these problems. And he's very clearly one of these Hollywood fruitcakes that prides himself on his journey of psychological healing. I'm finding myself and I'm discovering all of this buried trauma keeping me from being truly happy and reaching my full potential. And, so this guy prides himself on having psychological problems and then trying to work through them. He prides himself on going to therapy. I mean, I have met a ton of people like this in Hollywood. Even, actually, one of my exes, I'm embarrassed to say, is like this. Honestly, I find it really annoying. Nobody should be proud of having psychological trauma. I mean, I guess don't be ashamed of it, I guess, but proud? Anyway, this guy thinks that everybody should be going to a psychiatrist just like he does. And since most people don't go to a psychiatrist, he's written into his show these little mini psych sessions in order to give people a little bit of that psychological treatment. But what's really awful about this is that he's not a qualified psychologist. He gives bad advice, reinforcing delusional ideas, and as I mentioned earlier, these little on-screen therapy sessions basically always just amount to affirmations for characters with crises of confidence. If you only knew how amazing you really are, you could do anything.
You're gifted. You're brave.
Your record is spotless. I'd like to offer you a commission to join us on the Enterprise.
Sir?
I'm certain, should you choose to, Starfleet would be fortunate to have an officer like you.
You know what? You're right. I forgot that I'm a magically perfect character in every single way, and I need no training or education to be great at literally everything.
So the right time for genius.
Now, you wouldn't think that such talented, amazing people would need all this affirmation, but it actually makes sense because in real life, there is one group who often suffer from debilitating stress, depression, and other psychological problems. Diversity hires. Often women and ethnic minorities hired to fill diversity quotas will suffer from something called imposter syndrome.
Clance first studied imposterism in female college students and faculty. Their work established pervasive feelings of fraudulence in this group. The same thing has been established across gender, race, age, though it may be more prevalent in underrepresented or disadvantaged groups.
As a woman, a Black woman at that, I felt as if no matter what I did, regardless of the accomplishments, I was never quite enough. I just knew at any moment they would discover that I was there by mistake. Between 70 to 75% of the population suffers from the imposter syndrome, and that estimate is even greater for women and professionals of color.
The kinds of affirmations that you hear in the lame Kurtzman version of Star Trek and many other Hollywood shows are precisely what you would hear somebody tell somebody suffering from imposter syndrome. So perhaps that's the thing. Maybe that is how Kurtzman believes that he's helping the world. He's conducting a massive imposter syndrome therapy session for women and minorities, but especially for Black women. And, I guess this is necessary because so many people in important jobs are now diversity hires, and imposter syndrome has become that big of a problem that we need group therapy in the form of Star Trek episodes. But you know what? Here's an idea. Maybe, perhaps, the problem is better solved another way. Stop hiring unqualified people. Because that's the real problem here. Diversity hires don't suffer from imposter syndrome irrationally. They suffer from imposter syndrome because they are imposters. They are unqualified for the job. If everyone who feels compelled to hire based on race, gender, sexual orientation instead actually hired on merit, this problem would end. But now you've got a problem so extensive that this TV show producer believes that it's his duty to produce a TV show to help treat diversity hires suffering from imposter syndrome around the world. Needless to say, this results in some terrible TV shows. But the problem really isn't the poor quality of these shows. The problem isn't even the political agenda being pushed. The problem is the core reason for all of this, the cult of critical theory. Until we remove all of the critical theory cultists from positions of power in politics, in the corporate world, in the media, in academia, we will see this cultural sickness continue to spread. Critical theory is a cancer, and it is killing America. I pray that enough people recognize this cancer so that we can cut it out before it's too late. And that is my review of the new Star Trek show Brave New Worlds, or whatever it's called. Well, that's it for me, and remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant, it's just that they know so much that is not so. Good night.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening.